Hello everyone, and welcome to another BPMN process video. With Axelor BPM use case videos, discover and understand various BPM processes in detail. BPM allows you to design any business process regardless of its complexity in compliance with the BPMN standard. This video will focus on the process of recruitment. The slightly more substantial process starts with the creation of a job offer and ends with the integration of a new employee into the company. Let's focus on the start of this process. The HR assistant creates the offer and receives all available applications. Applications are received until the end of the available applications or when the application deadline is reached. The deadline is represented by an interruptive timer boundary event on the application reception task. Now that this step is complete, we can move on to CV selection. CV selection is represented by a sub-process in which the first part of the process consists of examining the CV. From here, the HR assistant has three options. The CV is reclassified to another position in this branch, which triggers the reclassification sub-process. This reclassification process is handled by the HR department, which means that the candidate has to be contacted. Following this contact, there are two possibilities. Firstly, the candidate accepts the reclassification, and so we trigger the process not shown here of recruitment on reclassification. Or the candidate refuses, in which case we end the process. We also have the option of refusing the application. In this case, an email is sent to the candidate and we end the process. Finally, the application may be accepted. As you can see, this is a multi-instance sequential sub-process. This model enables us to indicate that we will iterate through all the chosen applications, thereby allowing us to create a short list of resumes. This selection of CVs will give rise to an initial telephone interview, also modeled in a sub-process that necessarily leads to recontacting the candidate and checking their availability. In the case of a candidate who is no longer available, we capture this information at the border and put an end to the recruitment of this candidate. Otherwise, if the candidate is available, we propose an interview date. This interview date proposal leads to the situation requiring the use of an event gateway, which will offer us two choices. The first will be the candidate's withdrawal, which is an event taking place modeled by this branch and once again logically putting an end to the candidate's application. And the second is arrival at the interview date. On the day of the interview, we carry out the telephone interview procedure, which in turn will lead to two situations, a successful application or a rejected application, as usual. I'm not going to dwell on the rejection of the application, as we've already discussed the situation several times. Nor am I going to re-explain the usefulness of this symbol on the telephone interview sub-process, which is a sequential multi-instance sub-process. For all applicants who have passed the telephone interview with flying colors, we're going to enter a double situation. Either the position requires a technical interview, in which case we'll pass on applications to the technical interview and proceed in that direction, or the position doesn't require it, which legitimizes the use of an inclusive gateway where we may or may not parallelize information processing. In either case, we'll forward the application to the HR department. Let's move on to the case where we need to carry out a technical interview. I'm using a link here to make my process clearer. The link here is retrieved from this point in my model and corresponds to the technical manager who has to carry out the technical interview. The technical interview calls on some interesting notions. Since following the interview date proposal we've already commented on, we're going to use a business rule task in the case of an interview. Based on the technical test and the results delivered by the candidate, the business rule task will automatically estimate whether or not the test has been passed. so we've automatically determined whether the application is rejected or accepted. In the case of a successful application, we'll use an escalation event and a border escalation event on our technical interview subprocess to transmit the application directly to the HR department, or at least to indicate that the application has passed. Which brings us back to an inclusive gateway, and so back to the first gateway we saw earlier. We now come to link 2. Link 2 concerns the HR director. This HR manager will in turn propose an interview to the candidate. You already know the structure for this interview with the candidate, as it's identical or at least very similar to what we saw earlier. It will result in either an acceptance of one or more applications or a rejection. We don't have information on the number of applications that will be accepted, but let's assume that only one application will be accepted in the end. This successful application leads to the proposal of an offer. The proposal of an offer is not accepted immediately, and in this case, we can enter into a whole game of counter-proposals. Either the candidate accepts directly, in which case we of course terminate the recruitment process, or we go back to the counter-proposal, in which case we also terminate the application process. We could of course have modeled a salary negotiation sub-process. Today, this is not the case. We took the principle that in the case of a counter-proposal, we simply rejected the application. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you in our next video. Want to know more about the BPMN standard? Make sure to register to our free BPMN mailing training through the link in the description.